Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the March 5th, 2019 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It's my privilege to call this meeting to order. Happy Mardi Gras to everyone. If you haven't already done so, please feel free to pick up a copy of our agendas. There are conveniently placed ones on the shelves on either side of the room. You will note from the agenda that there will be multiple opportunities for public comment during tonight's meeting, both with respect to each of the items that are on tonight's agenda, as well as a segment under item 4, which is reserved for public comments of a general nature. At that point in the meeting, any residents in the audience who have any questions or comments of a general nature with respect to things that are not on tonight's agenda, we would welcome you coming to the podium, telling us who you are, and look forward to listening and hearing from you then. But first, it is our proud custom, even on Mardi Gras, to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. So everyone could please rise and join us in reciting the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you very much. Now this is the part of the meeting where we all get to introduce ourselves. I'd like to ask our fine village clerk, April Holden, to please call the roll.
Commissioner Wallace? Here. Commissioner Earl?
Here.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Here.
Commissioner White? Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Commissioner Barnett?
Here.
Mayor Tully?
Here. Thank you very much. That brings us to item 3, which pertains to minutes review and approval of minutes of prior meeting minutes. We have one set of minutes to review and approve tonight. Those are the minutes from our regular council meeting of February 19th, 2019. Unless there are changes, comments, corrections, or other serious concerns with respect to the minutes, I would ask for a motion to please approve.
Mayor Tully, I move to approve the council minutes from February 19th, 2019 as presented.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Those minutes are approved unanimously. And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we are at item 4, which is reserved for public comments of a general nature. If there are any members of the audience that have any questions or comments of a general nature with respect to things that are not on the agenda later tonight, we ask you to please come to the podium. We'd love to hear from you. Any questions or comments of a general nature with respect to things not on the agenda? All right, we've got some hardcore agenda people here tonight. That's good. All right, well, hearing no public comments of a general nature, we'll move on to item 5, our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Mayor Tully, I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to any of the items on tonight's consent agenda? Questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Hearing none. Yes? No? Wasn't sure if that was a hand.
Oh, no.
All right, just making sure. We haven't worked on our signals yet, like
Sorry.
in the NBA. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace? Aye. Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Consent agenda passes unanimously. That brings us to our active agenda, which is item 6, and we have 3 items on tonight's active agenda. We'll start with item 6A. Do I have a motion to adopt a resolution approving the final plat of subdivision with exceptions for 1508 Warren Avenue and 4940 Seeley Avenue? Do I have a motion?
Mayor Tully, I move that the council adopt a resolution approving the final plat of subdivision for 1508 Warren Avenue and 4940 Seeley Avenue as presented.
Second.
Questions or comments from members of the audience on this item? Good evening, welcome.
Good evening. I'm Marshall Schmidt, 4923 Seeley. So I come before you again after several other opportunities for comment now that this is up for decision. First, I want to thank the staff of the village for meeting with me right after the last meeting to provide me information and to discuss the proposal before you tonight. I want to start by going back to what the issue is before the council, and that is someone is coming here asking to accept or to be exempted from certain provisions of the zoning ordinance. And to do that, giving up their grandfathered status on these plots, they need to establish, and it is their burden to establish, that they are somehow experiencing hardship or will experience hardship if this is not granted. And they're really seeking at bottom to the exception to the 75-foot rule that was passed by this council as part of a comprehensive plan to deal with the problem that the council perceived as a big problem. Now, there are certain things that everyone agrees about this variance, which is that they are seeking to replat this so that there are 2 lots with a 56-foot wide, 56-foot wide lots, which are not only narrower than the 75-foot, but significantly narrower than most every other lot on the block. The only other lot that has a width of that length is the other corner lot. And the house on that lot is situated completely different than what's being proposed tonight. At bottom, the only reason that they are saying that this exception should be granted is because it will improve the stormwater situation on that lot and that on those lots, and that there is a LPDA there that will be improved by this project. And this is what the staff talked to me about. And there are 2 significant reasons why this is not sufficient for the petitioner to carry their burden of showing why they should have this exception. And the first is that this council passed a series of regulations to regulate stormwater. And whatever happens to these plots, they are going to be subject to those rules. So as the owner acknowledged, 2 new houses will be built on these lots. They are buildable, and when those houses are built, they will have to comply with the stormwater regulations, which were designed to solve the stormwater problems. But here, the problem is particularly acute when it comes to using this as a reason why there should be these exceptions. Because if you look at what the owner is proposing, they are saying that, well, we are going to build these houses in a way that improves the stormwater situation. But they have not presented, and I asked the staff to come up with ideas, and to Mr. Fieldman's credit, he challenged the staff to do that, but nothing was forthcoming. Nowhere has a proposal been made as to whether there's an alternative to what is being proposed that will preserve the integrity of the neighborhood, will preserve these lots as they exist, and will address the stormwater in the same way. So based on the information that the staff presented, is there a way that I can put on the screen the plat of survey of the existing house on the western lot? What the staff told me is that the proposal of the owner will result in a reduction of 1,866 square feet of impervious space. And as I understand the way this works, the metric here is impervious space. So if you reduce impervious space, that helps the stormwater situation because the water drains. And they're saying that the proposal will result in a net loss of 1,866 feet of impervious space. But what the staff has not indicated is that if you look at these plots of land and you take into account what is there now, do you have the plat? The actual plot that shows the survey. Keep going. There you go. Here, there, right there. No, yeah, that's the one. Now, if you look at this is the existing configuration on the western lot. If you take into account, I don't know if this is going to work or not. If you take into account, if you could just look at the chart, this is all impervious space. This driveway right here, and this sidewalk here. If you make this pavers, which is now what they use to remove impervious space, and you look at the square footage of this driveway and this sidewalk, and you then, could you go to the other existing configuration? Let's make you go the other way. There, that's it. And so the LPDA runs this way, And right now, this is about 400 square feet of impervious space. If you reconfigure this and build the house outside the LPDA, and you take into account the 400 square feet you're going to save here, and the 1,400 feet of square feet that you're going to save in impervious space in the existing driveway, you know what? It means that building 2 houses on the existing lots give you the same net improvement in the LPDA. But none of that has been considered. No one has considered what the alternatives are. What you're looking at is one proposal by the contractor that says merely it's going to be better, but it doesn't take into account the impact that it's going to have on the neighborhood. And that's what this council has to do. By approving this petition, you're going to be setting a precedent of narrow lots granted merely because they're going to comply with the stormwater regulations that this body has passed for all lots, whether they're exempted or not. That's not a case for an exemption. That doesn't carry the burden on this petition. This little pin that I wear signifies that I'm a member of the Rotary Club of Chicago, and we live our life by the 4-way test. And that test says, first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? This petition does not pass the 4-way test. It is not fair to all concerned. As crafted, without any alternative or any creative solution, it ruins the integrity of the neighborhood. It initiates a precedent that this council has repeatedly expressed a desire not to do, namely carve up our village into small, narrow lots. Will this build goodwill and better friendship? No. In the neighborhood, it will do nothing but create bitterness against the council for turning this village into something that the residents of this village do not want. And will it be beneficial to all concerned? No, it will not. It is beneficial to the owner and detrimental to the owners. Thank you. The bottom line
We
here...
usually use a buzzer, but tonight we're using that.
The bottom line here is, as I've said at all the previous meetings on this issue, without an alternative, the petitioner has failed to carry their burden. This petition is not in the best interest of this village, and this body should vote no on the petition. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Other questions or comments on this item from members of the audience? Please. Welcome. Good evening.
My name is Sarah Ungary, and I live at 4930 Sealy, and I sent an email to you all last week about a lot of my concerns, and I won't go over those again. I just want to, I wrote something, but it basically echoes what Marshall's already said, that at the end of the day, I don't feel that the person who wants to push this issue has met the burden of proof that the regulations have said. They even said in one of the other meetings that they could build on the lots as they are, which to me indicates there isn't a hardship, and it was my understanding that the hardship case was what was needed to grant an exception. So I also ask you to not pass this because I do not think they've met the burden that is required.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Other questions or comments from members of the audience? Good evening. Welcome.
Hi. My name is Karen King. My husband and I live at 4939 Sealy, right across the street from the greenhouse on Sealy. We've lived there for 15 years, and my arguments won't be as sophisticated as my other neighbors, but for all but approximately 2 years, that house, I don't remember the address, but on the corner, has been vacant or renter occupied, and most recently, squatters had to be removed from the property. This has not enhanced our neighborhood. However, this is not to say that anything else would be better than what is there now. I'm a layperson, but I never have heard any compelling argument that the developer has met any burden for the variance, that there's a hardship burden. So that the developer should have to develop with the 75-foot lot width. It would be preferable, if there's going to be any development different than what is there now, to have one home on a larger 75-foot width lot so that there's room for proper drainage, not like the water retention eyesore and safety hazard at the corner of Sealy and Prairie that we've talked about. That, whoever approved that was not in the best interest of our neighborhood. It's dangerous. I have a fear that some little kid's going to fall into that thing, and I'm concerned that exactly that will happen at the corner of at Warren and Sealy. A home properly placed on a larger lot, a 75-foot lot, will provide a visual buffer from the traffic on Warren and the train tracks. This will make the home more desirable. The owners will be more vested in our neighborhood and will prevent the house from again becoming a rental or vacant, which is what I've had to deal with for 15 years. And currently there's a giant tree that has fallen in the yard. It's been there for months. So it's not been a good thing. My concern with the proposal to have two lots oriented the way they are is that while this is more profitable for the developer than having a 75-foot width lot, that the house that will eventually be again on the corner is going to become similarly a vacant, squatted, a rental. It's not going to be economically viable across the street, right on Warren and across the street from the tracks. That's always going to be a difficult property to sell. And if it's oriented similarly to the one at the other corner of Prairie and Sealy, it's not as desirable. It directly abuts the owner, the property next to it, and it visually does not look good. And I would think that those owners fronting on a different street would not feel as involved in our street if it was oriented a different way. So I'm not in favor of two lots, and it seems the developers have not met the hardship burden for this to be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Other questions or comments on this item from members of the audience? Hearing none, thank you for those that spoke. Appreciate your input both tonight and previously. I'll turn it to the council then. Questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry. If Commissioner Jose would yield the floor,
Absolutely.
please. Welcome.
I'm sorry, thank you. Last time I thought you mentioned comments from the petitioner, so I was waiting to hear that from you.
Oh, that's during the first reading. We're on a voting meeting now.
Gotcha, I apologize.
No worries.
So good evening. I just had a few comments regarding some of the concerns that were actually brought up last time we were in session a few weeks ago. First of all, just to make sure that we're clear, we are taking two lots and actually turning them into two lots. So everyone is clear, we're not trying to make any more lots than are already there. We're just trying to reconfigure them so they work a little bit better. Last time I was in front of this body, I believe a number of inaccuracies were presented. And in order for this council to truly be able to make an informed decision regarding this matter, I think it'd just be prudent to share some of the information that I believe is material to the decision-making process. First, I do feel the need to address a comment that was brought up in the last session. And that was actually a statement made by one of the residents stating that, well, first of all, I'm not the contractor, I'm not the owner, I'm the petitioner, so I do want to be clear about that. But it was mentioned that the contractor is playing a game, quote unquote, and I'd like to go on record as adamantly objecting to that statement. It implies recklessness, it implies a lack of transparency, and it implies a retention of the facts. And we have been transparent and honest through every step of this process. So I did not feel it would be right for me to come up and make any comments unless I first stated that, because I don't think that was a fair statement to make. Again, this wasn't brought up this evening, but it was brought up last time we were in session, and it was regarding the trees. One of the concerns brought up was in regard to the proposed configuration and its effect on the trees on the lot. I wanted to point out that we did take this concern seriously. In fact, we went so far as to have the trees inventoried and assessed so we can be conscious about what was out there and the state that it was in. So we contacted a certified arborist by the name of Robert Breyer. His Illinois arborist license number is 1248. And I believe this body will find him credible, as he used to work for the Village of Downers Grove. When Mr. Breyer took inventory of the trees on the property, he identified 25 trees, and of the 25 trees, 17 were recommended for removal. So they were either dead, in poor condition, or they posed a hazard in their current state. So that's 17 trees, that's almost 70%, that's 68% of the trees on the property. So we certainly will do what we can to protect the remaining trees regardless of the outcome of this hearing. But I think this fact is worth noting, as keeping all the trees on the property as they are, unfortunately, is not an option. At least not a safe option. As was mentioned earlier, there's, during any windstorm, it's raining branches over there, and it's because of the condition of all the trees, and the fact that they're losing branches and honestly creating a hazard. Another concern that was brought up in the last session when we were here was the character and what this reconfiguration might do to the character of the neighborhood. As was previously just mentioned, there's a little red house there on Warren that's been abandoned for many, many years. It's become kind of the eyesore of the neighborhood. The green home on the corner has been vacant for over a year as well. This home, as was noted, recently had squatters. They were in there doing drugs, creating an unsafe environment for neighbors and children in the area. So are these properties really adding to the character of the neighborhood as they are? If this site remains as it is and it does not get built as it is, how long will those properties be there? I'm not a resident of Downers Grove, but I wouldn't want my children living on that block, knowing that that's happening there. So I'd like to pose a question. Why did the Planning and Zoning Department and its engineers here in Downers Grove support this reconfiguration? I'm not a licensed engineer, so I'm deferring to the experts as we go through this process. But when asked, it was because it clearly supported and improved the stormwater situation in the neighborhood. And it wasn't a question, it wasn't an opinion, it was a fact. And when the Planning and Zoning Board several weeks ago recommended to reconfigure these two lots as they've been proposed, it was because that body, tasked with making the best recommendations for the village in regard to engineering, planning, and zoning, also believed it was in the best interest of the village because clearly it improved the stormwater situation in the neighborhood. It wasn't a question, it wasn't an opinion, it was a fact. So, and it was even mentioned by the Community Development Director that, we have almost 2,000 square feet of improvement in the LPDA in the impervious reduction, which obviously is huge. That's a house. So finally, we asked a licensed professional engineer, stormwater engineer, about their opinion. And we wanted to take somebody completely out of the box, someone who didn't do the engineering for the project itself, and we wanted to get their opinion. Because again, I'm not going to make any false statements. I'm going to go strictly off the facts and the experts, because they know what I know tenfold. And I furnished this letter to the council here tonight. And for those here who have not seen it, I would like to read it. And it says, as requested, we briefly reviewed the proposed preliminary engineering plan for the reconfiguration of the two above referenced properties. As a local firm, we've worked on numerous projects in Downers Grove since 1969. We are very familiar with the Village of Downers Grove, the drainage issues within the village, the particular challenges associated with LPDAs, and the village and county requirements that apply to these situations. From an engineering perspective, the proposed reconfiguration is an excellent approach to the management of stormwater. If constructed as proposed, the reconfiguration of the properties will eliminate the flooding of one residence and simultaneously reduce the amount of runoff tributary to the LPDA. While we are aware that there are other zoning-related issues present, we are of the belief that any negative impacts due to those issues are essentially a matter of perception and are not significant enough to outweigh the very real drainage benefits that the proposed plan will provide. In our opinion, this plan would be a significant net benefit to the property owners involved, the neighbors, and the village. And we would recommend that the village approve this plan. As always, we're available for your convenience for questions, and it's signed by Edward Seifert, principal at Intech Consulting, who has probably done hundreds of engineering plans for the village. So again, I defer to the experts, and we know that this plan is going to be a benefit to everybody involved. In my years of working with the village, I've heard many times about the millions of dollars spent to improve the stormwater situation. I know it's a very big problem. It's a financial drain. This is actually a very unique opportunity. How many times is there an opportunity put in front of this council to improve a stormwater situation with no financial cost, without burdening taxpayers, without years of planning and development and expense? That opportunity sits here before this council. And I ask that this proposal is approved for that reason as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Thank you for sharing that with us. So I'll just check. Any other questions or comments from anyone in the audience with respect to this item?
Mayor, I have a point of order. I know I've spoken, but I have a point of order. I'd like to point out that neither the letter they refer to nor whatever study was done by the tree person is a matter of record here. I believe it's a matter of administrative law. It would be improper for this body to rely on that evidence to the extent that they're going to address this question tonight.
I appreciate that, Mr. Schmidt, although as I've often heard told to me from the bench, it goes to weight, not admissibility. Any other questions or comments from members of the audience? Okay, well, thank you for your patience, Commissioner Jose.
Thank you, Mayor. First off, I think it's important to clear up a couple of things. We've heard tonight that some folks in the neighborhood would prefer one house as opposed to two, and I've heard that from friends of mine that live in the neighborhood. We've also heard that these are two buildable lots right now. And I think it's important to remember that houses could be built on both of these lots right now as they sit. It's also incumbent on us not to look at what could be, but what's actually before us. The proposal doesn't have to meet the test of make it the best that it could be. It has to meet the test that's set forth in our zoning code, and that's contained at 20.602C. So what could have been proposed by the petitioner is really immaterial. What we have to determine is whether it impacts the value or the reasonable use of the surrounding properties, whether it's consistent with the trend of development in the area and the surrounding uses, whether the characteristics of the property support or mitigate against the granting of the exception, whether the exception is in conformance with the general plan and spirit of the chapter, meaning the zoning code, and whether the exception will alter or be consistent with the essential character of the locality. I believe this standard is met. Does the zoning code currently call for 75-foot lots? Yes. But when you look at every other lot in the neighborhood, it's 60 feet or narrower. In fact, there's a 56-foot lot across the street. To say that two lots that are 56 feet wide, or thereabout, 56.29, I believe is the number, you have to conclude that it's consistent with the character of the neighborhood. It's improving the stormwater along the way, and I believe that new homes that are hopefully about to be built will improve the character of the neighborhood versus what's already there. Is it the petition I would like to see? No. Does it meet the standard? Yes. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't repeat the section of the code that Commissioner Jose has. I appreciate the petitioner coming forward, providing us with a letter, and as far as procedures, it's probably received as we receive emails and that from other residents as well. So it's considered. Thank you for that. But when I look at this petition, I'm looking on part 2 of that section, whether the exception is consistent with the trend of development in the area and surrounding uses. Also, section 5, whether the exception will alter or be considered with the essential character of the locality. And I'm extremely disappointed in the Plan Commission. In my years up here, quite often when the Plan Commission makes a decision, there's maybe one or two that are the outliers, the ones that say let's ignore the rules, because this looks good. It looks good. Let's find a way to do this, and they start looking at trends and things, and they basically ignore what's going on. In this case, it was the majority of the Plan Commission that I totally disagree with, and the two individuals that I think nailed it on the head. The Plan Commission ignored precedent in which council specifically wanted to reduce the number of smaller lots by creating the 75-foot requirement. That was their intent. Plan Commission ignored that. The 60-foot lots were grandfathered, or they might be called legal nonconforming, or whatever art form we use, legal art form we use. And they're saying it's creating a trend to smaller lots as built. You know, when you look at the picture from from above, you'll see 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 56. And the Plan Commission called this a trend. So when they approve this, if we approve this, it'll be 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, see, 56, 56, 56. And what that does is it creates a trend for the future. And now anybody can look at that and say, see, it's a trend. There's 3 of them now. We looked at one exception, and now there's 3, so now it's a trend. So this Plan Commission can go ahead and use that as a precedent to further create smaller lots. Future Plan Commissions can look at this and call it a trend towards smaller lots. It's simply not the case. And it's a trend that council has made it very clear that council did not want this for the village. That's why we have the 75-foot. The stormwater situation, no matter what's built, it has to meet stormwater requirements, period. So you don't have to make an exception to solve a stormwater problem, because the stormwater problem has to be addressed when something's built. And we don't know what it is. I don't want to go back to where we were 10 years ago. That's what started all this, was developers and builders coming in, whether they're residents or not, coming in and making small lots, a little bit at a time, we go 60, it's 56, and we'll make it 45. Where do you stop? And you just keep making smaller lots and creating construction problems, additional stormwater problems, and it was a trend that needed back then, 10 years ago, to be stopped. And the arguments I hear from the petitioner are presented, but I've heard these dozens of times in the past. It's the same arguments. And that's why we changed it. So I appreciate what the petitioner is doing. It's not a game. It's just something that has been done time and time again. And we wanted to put a stop to it. And it's time to keep a stop to it. We need to preserve our neighborhoods, the character of our neighborhoods, and not keep creating flag lots. You know, what comes next? Flag lots. We went through all this stuff. And I don't want to go back there. And I don't think our residents want to go back there either. So I will not be in support of this petition. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. I had to choke a little bit when you said flag plot. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Wallace.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I'm going to try and keep my comments brief. I absolutely appreciate the Plan Commission's recommendations. We have commissions in place for a reason. However, I am struggling with this setting a precedent for less than 75 feet of frontage. The contractor says exactly from the Plan Commission minutes that both lots are buildable exactly as they presently stand. Between this setting a precedent, that statement, and some of the resident concerns, I will not be voting for this tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Earl, we'll just go right down the line.
Okay. I spent 10 years on the Zoning Board of Appeals, and so what I would have done with any Zoning Board of Appeals case that is coming in and asking for a variation for a building on a narrower lot. I went out and I walked the properties. I don't believe that the burden of hardship has been met. I don't believe that it's good to set a precedent of smaller than 75 feet wide lots, and I believe these lots will be developed as with new houses, and as such will be required to mitigate the stormwater no matter what. That is our ordinance, and they will be redeveloped in accordance with our current ordinance. Might not be perfect. The proposal wasn't perfect either. And I think that reconfiguring the lots doesn't make the proposal any better. So I will be voting against this, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Barnett.
Thanks, Mayor. Our ordinance says practical difficulties or particular hardships, and I don't find a lot of definition of that, but practical difficulties is certainly one that we can all understand. And there are some practical difficulties in building on these two lots as they sit right now, and they have to do primarily with the LPDA. The LPDA is important here because we're talking about stormwater, but we're talking about two mixed bags as we have this conversation. The ordinance that we've recently adopted will require the detention on site. That's true. It does not affect LPDA overland flow. And overland flow, which is a factor in the entire watershed for about 4 blocks in this area, will be materially improved by removing structures from the LPDA. The extent to which the proposal exception impacts on the value or reasonable use of surrounding properties, there's clearly no detriment to the reasonable use. Value is one that is almost never clearly defined and clearly proved by this body or those that approach it. It becomes a very subject thing, and it's entirely speculation. But the existing use will not be deterred or in any way impaired by this reconfiguration. Whether the exception is consistent with the trend of development, and then I'm going to take that with 5, the essential character of the locality. We talk about those up here, and I suggest we're talking about them in this instance a little bit too broadly. We spend a lot of time and effort as a body, as a community, focusing on neighborhoods. We want to try and not change the essential character of a neighborhood. We use that over and over when we talk about streets, when we talk about street design, we talk about sidewalks, we talk about traffic. In this case, the essential character of this neighborhood is a bunch of 60-foot lots with the occasional one that's slightly narrower. That's what the character of this neighborhood, the trend of development in this neighborhood, I would suggest is a development that's probably 50-plus years old and is largely 60-foot lots. It's not the trend of development for the entirety of Downers Grove that's in question. The characteristics of the property which support or mitigate against the granting of the exception, these characteristics are unique in that the back end of the parcel is an LPDA. We can make a change that takes and creates 2 parcels, neither of which in future development will likely negatively impact our LPDA. That's a big deal. It's a really important thing. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last at least 6 to 8 years buying properties that are in LPDAs because of the redevelopment or protection of them is so difficult. Could it be developed? Sure it could. But the development required, the engineering required, if that doesn't meet practical difficulties, I don't understand what would. Anything technically can be developed within an LPDA, but it is absolutely a practical difficulty and an engineering nightmare to do so. And then whether it's in section with, whether the exception is in conformance with the general plan or spirit of the chapter, the general plan and spirit of the chapter has lots of attributes to it, not just lot width. And what we do with this reconfiguration is essentially get way more of them in compliance than sits today. Whether it's square footage or lot depths or orientation, or LPDA components, we make these 2 lots better in almost every aspect except for the width. So sure, it's clearly still got a problem, but it is more compliant with the rules and guidelines set out in the chapter as reconfigured than it is today. I think this is something that we absolutely should do, and I think it's not just a benefit to the developer, and I don't think it's just a negative to the neighborhood. I appreciate that you guys don't like the look of it, but I think it helps the neighborhood from a stormwater standpoint, and I think it helps the future planning of the village in trying to mitigate and manage stormwater as a system way beyond an initial parcel. So to that end, Mayor, I think it's something we should do.
Thank you, Commissioner. From my own perspective, I want to start out by saying I don't blame the petitioner, I don't blame the Planning Commission, I don't blame staff for coming up with a very creative solution and seizing upon an opportunity to potentially address a long-standing neighborhood stormwater issue. So let's just set all that aside. And this isn't about making more money, this isn't about anything, because this is a very creative solution that on a number of different fact levels could address a very real problem in our community. So I don't blame anybody in looking at this and saying, you know what, I realize this doesn't check all the boxes, but this might be something that has some redeeming qualities and maybe we should consider it. And we're considering it. The other thing I want to point out is that obviously reasonable minds can differ on this. Case in point, we've got 2 former chairs of land use boards in our community here who disagree on this outcome. So what a surprise that people disagree on this topic or can see it differently. So I don't think anybody ought to feel as though they've been singled out for some kind of begrudgment, because that's not what this is. This is clearly something that was well thought out, well crafted, but we're talking about a bunch of different policy decisions here. And in my view, they're conflicting policy decisions. So the fact that some people view them from one spectrum doesn't mean that somebody who views it from another spectrum is wrong. It's just a different perspective. As it stands right now, we've got 3 people who have said they're going to vote no. There's only 6 of us here right now, so it doesn't really matter what I say because the motion will fail. It needs a majority to pass. But I'll tell you where I'm at on it just because I think it would be important going forward. I have a longer lens of perspective on this, and I started to talk about this before. I started up here as a trustee in 2001, and this was a time where there was a trend of chopping up lots, making them smaller and smaller. There were things called flag lots that, to me, in a sort of a bizarre way, created multiple lots out of one lot, which have never happened, and we paid the price for it. We started seeing all sorts of stormwater problems. We started seeing challenges with addressing stormwater problems, and a lot of that had to do with the minimal side lot that you could work with on different properties. Some of the ordinances we put in lately about trying to prevent future or additional stormwater headaches, smaller lots make that very challenging. Now, is this an exception to that? Sure, people can argue that, and people have. And they wouldn't be wrong, it's a different perspective. But my perspective has been that we have made, as a community, a fundamental change in direction, not just the neighborhood, the community. And we've done that through our comprehensive plan, we've done that through our community planning exercises that we've done over the course of the last almost 20 years. And one thing that has been consistent is that we should stop creating smaller lots because, generally speaking, they create more problems than they solve. Are there going to be exceptions to that rule? Sure. Do I want to hear about those exceptions and look at them and decide whether or not, in some rare cases, it might make sense? Absolutely. So I don't want to discourage that creativity going forward, but that doesn't mean I have to approve it, but I want to at least have the ability to review it. The required lot width is 75 foot wide, and the idea was that no future lots would be created that were smaller than that. Clearly, this doesn't meet that. The neighborhood is mostly 60-foot wide lots, already contrary to the more recent trend, in my opinion. And yet, these are substantially smaller than even that. We're talking about 56, and not just one, but 2. That bothers me a lot, and it bothers me from the lens of history that, to me, that runs counter to the trend that has been very successful over the last 10, 15, 20 years. Now, I get the stormwater aspects of this. I get the fact that there are stormwater issues. I get the fact there's an LPDA. I get the fact there may be an opportunity here to address some of those things. But I have a fundamental philosophical problem with going against what I view to have been a trend that took a long time to turn around, and I think it's been very successful on behalf of the entire community. So we're looking at, in my view, a concern, and I got to agree with you, Commissioner Waldeck, because I've seen it happen. I've been sitting here when I've seen it happen, where someone will point to, well, there's this in the neighborhood, that's my evidence for doing it again. And we effectively put a stop to that, or close to it, and I don't want to see that fire lit up again, because it's just not a good idea. So that's kind of where I'm coming from in that, and that's just a strong policy choice. There are conflicting policies here, and that's the one that weighs more heavily on my decision here. So I do think that increasing the number of substantially non-conforming lots is ordinarily not a good idea. So the case has to be made that this is a really, really, really good exception to that rule that just is so compelling that we have to pass it. And then I turn to what our code says, so it's not just my view, although my view does inform how I look at the criteria here, which, as Commissioner Barnett points out rightfully, since the dawn of time have been subjectively applied by whoever happens to be sitting up here. So let's just get that out there. Section 20.602C lays out the exceptions. It says an exception shall be recommended by the Plan Commission. It doesn't have to be granted, it's only recommended. We're the ones that decide. Only if it finds that there are practical difficulties or particular hardships in the way of carrying out the strict letter of the provisions of the subdivision ordinance. And then goes on to talk about what the criteria are that one can consider in making that determination. And it says, in its consideration of the standards of practical difficulties or particular hardships, the Commission may consider, but is not limited to, the following items that have been described by my colleagues. Now, I looked at these 5, but these are not an exclusive list. So my 6th point is the one I just described to you a moment ago, which has been the community-wide trend for 2 decades now of getting away from doing this. And so to me, it's a really, really extraordinarily high burden to get over this in this situation. And I just don't see it here. At best, in my opinion, the third factor has been met. The others I just don't see being met, notwithstanding what I get are the potential benefits or the certain benefits of proceeding with the stormwater reconfiguration here. And again, that's just the way I weigh the factors. Commissioner Jose and Commissioner Barnett weigh the factors differently. None of us are wrong. We're all bringing our own experiences in our review of these factors, but in my opinion, they're just not met. At best, I would say this is a close call. And there's another lens that I've looked at decision-making at for the last almost 16 years, is you look at what the neighborhood wants and then you look at what the community wants. And sometimes the neighborhood feels very strongly about something, the community doesn't care. Sometimes the neighborhood doesn't care, but the community feels really strong about it. To me here, what I'm hearing is that we have very strong community-wide forces here in policies, both with not creating smaller lots and trying to not create new stormwater problems. And I realize this might actually fix one, but I think more broadly, smaller lots create more headaches, and something that this council and prior councils has committed to not doing. And so I see those two policies actually weighing against this. And then if I throw on top of that what I'm hearing from the neighborhood, it seems to me that both the neighborhood and the community are aligned here. And generally speaking, if it's a tie, the tie goes to the neighborhood. Here, I don't even see it as a tie. I see the neighborhood's views consistent with the trends and the policies that, in my opinion, weigh more heavily on this. And it is about weight on this topic. So even though, when I call the roll here in a second, what I suspect we would have at best is a 3-3 and the motion would fail, I'm planning on voting against it for the reasons I just described. But again, I don't blame anybody. This is obviously a close call, as you can see in some people's minds. It depends on how you weigh these factors. And obviously different reasonable minds can differ on this. But I also don't want to discourage future opportunities being brought forward, because there may be those situations where this and future councils will consider it not to be as much of a difficulty as I've described. So with that, I will call for a roll call, please.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Nay.
Commissioner Earl?
Nay.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Nay.
Mayor Tully?
Nay. Matter fails 4-2. Thank you for all the input on it. Obviously, this is something that everyone thought about quite extensively. That brings us to item 6B on our active agenda. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance providing for the issuance of not to exceed $7 million general obligation bonds, Series 2019 of the Village of Downers Grove, DuPage County, Illinois, in one or more series, and providing for the levy and collection of direct annual tax sufficient for the payment of the principal and interest of said bonds. And I read all that so you wouldn't have to repeat it.
I move to adopt the ordinance as presented.
There you go.
Second.
Questions or comments from members of the audience? Questions or comments from members of the village council? I think we have some public comment back there.
Yes.
Hearing none, roll call, please.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, that matter is adopted unanimously, and that brings us to the final item on our active agenda, which is item 6C as in Charlie. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance regulating the sale of cats, dogs, and rabbits in the Village of Downers Grove?
Mayor Tully, I move to adopt an ordinance regulating the sale of cats, dogs, and rabbits in the Village of Downers Grove as presented.
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments from members of the audience? Questions or comments from members of the village council? All right, roll call, please.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, matter passes unanimously. That brings us to the end of our active agenda and on to item 7, which is our first reading or our workshop agenda. This is a more informal part of the meeting where items are presented for discussion consideration only. There is no vote taken at this time. Typically what we do is we ask our village staff to present the items for discussion, and then I will start with questions or comments from the village council and then turn it over to the audience for any further questions or comments. As mentioned, There are no votes or formal actions taken on these items tonight. So with that, we have one item on our first reading or our workshop agenda, and I would like to introduce our village manager, David Fieldman, to present the item.
Thank you, Mayor Tully. I'm going to simply introduce our Deputy Village Manager, Mike Baker, who will present the item.
That was a very easy introduction. Good evening, Mr. Baker.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. The purpose of the resolution presented this evening is to publicly place on file plans to rename the plaza that exists south of the Main Street train station in honor of Linda Kunze. Linda was the longtime, almost 20-year executive director of the Downtown Management Corporation before her passing in September of 2018. The resolution will be brought forward for formal consideration on April 9th, following a 30-day required notice period. In the meantime, staff is working with the Kunze family and the Downtown Management Corporation to plan an event dedicating the plaza. That event is scheduled to take place on May 11th, Saturday at 10:30 in the morning. That concludes my report.
Thank you very much. And obviously, we're thrilled to have this item come before us. It's being done so somewhat low-key at this point because this is being done according to the rules. We have to put this out there for 30 days before we can bring it up for a formal vote, and obviously at that time, we'll have a little bit more discussion about it. And then presumably, if it proceeds as we expect, we'll have appropriate acknowledgements and remembrances at the point of time of the actual ceremony. I know that this means a great deal to the Kunze family, and it's well-deserved because I think we've all said it before, and we'll save it for when we have those later meetings. But I think this is an entirely appropriate thing for us to do in recognition of Linda's significant legacy in our community. I don't know if any of the council members have any questions or want to add anything. Any questions or comments from members of the audience? All right, very good. And we have no more items.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, that brings us to the mayor's report. I just have one item. You may recall that I was formerly the District 3 municipal representative to the DuPage County Stormwater Management Committee, so why am I talking about it? Westmont trustee Steve Nero was my replacement, and he'll be serving us forward, but I did ask Steve to let me know what's going on so that I could continue to report out to the council, and he will intends to do so directly to whoever my successor is after May 7th, so that items that have an impact or interest to Downers Grove can be reported out. Staff will correct me, but according to Trustee Nero, our representative, there was a grant that was voted on this morning by the committee. I believe that the county board may still have to act upon it, but usually they do. It's for St. Joseph's Creek Stream Bank Stabilization Project. It's approximately a $495,000 project total, but the county is looking to approve a $75,000 grant that will come to us to assist with that project. So that was good news. I just wanted to share with everybody. That's $75,000 that comes from a different purse that we can apply towards some of our stormwater projects here in Downers Grove. And other than wishing everybody a happy Mardi Gras, I have nothing further on the mayor's report. So that takes us to item 9, which is back to Mr. Fieldman. Long time no see.
Thank you, Mayor Tully. I do have one item of note and interest to the community. The regularly scheduled village council meeting for next week will be canceled due to lack of agenda items. So no council meeting next week, but we'll pick it up again on March 19th.
We're just so efficient that we just get stuff done.
Yes, that's correct. It's rare, but we don't have a particular reason to meet, so that meeting will be canceled.
Very good. Thank you for letting everybody know. And for those that are just village council junkies and feel like you won't know what to do with yourself on a Tuesday night from 7 to 9, maybe we can set up something informal at a coffee shop and folks can just come and just get their fix. Thank you.
Thank you.
That then brings us to, I'm going to do it anyway, I'm going to put in an item 9A, Village Attorney's Report. Ms. Petrarca, good evening.
Good evening, Mayor. I have no report tonight. Thank you.
All right, very good. That brings us to item 10, which is reserved for village council member reports. This is an opportunity for members of the village council to either report out on things of interest or other goings on in the community, or to report out on their role as a liaison to other governmental bodies, similar to what I just did with respect to the DuPage County Stormwater Management Committee. I'll start with Commissioner Barnett tonight.
No report, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Earl.
No report, Mayor.
Commissioner Wallace.
No report, Mayor.
Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you, Mayor. Not necessarily a report, but I would just like to notify my fellow council members and staff that I will be submitting a new business item.
Quick, cancel all the rest of the meetings.
No, it's not going to take that long. Talked to staff about it previously. Tonight, you know, we, on our first reading, we talked about renaming a area for one of our prominent residents, and deservedly so. And I'm looking back at one of the major infrastructures of the past 10 years, and that was the Belmont Underpass. Or maybe the BNSF calls it the Belmont Overpass, I don't know. Anyway. But usually when these things are, you know, you're at ribbon cuttings and plaques and so forth, the people who are named are the ones who are in positions at the time of the event, at the time of the ribbon cutting, whoever happens to be in that position. And I think sometimes we ignore some of the people who actually had a major effect on getting the job done. And as far as the underpass goes, it was a long time coming, a lot of council members, a lot of state reps and representation and so forth. And we can't name them all, but there were 3 individuals that I'd like to recommend that we put up a plaque or some type of notice. The first one being Milton Seas, VIDOT. We needed to get some funding to get over a hoop and get the final funding, and he went to bat for us. He got it in the budget, and at great risk to his position, he eventually lost his position, and maybe that budgeting had something to do with it. But anyway, I'd like to recommend him. I'd also like to recommend one of our residents, George Swimmer. He's frequently seen at council meetings, so maybe about 2-3 times a year, pushing railroad safety, and he's been at it for a very, very long time. And it's like pushing a boulder, what was it, Sisyphus? Pushing
Yes.
the boulder up the hill, and it keeps coming back down. But in this case, as far as the underpass went, he was early on, attended meetings, he pushed that boulder, and he got it up the hill. He was a key resident, a key participant in that process, and I think he deserves some recognition. And the last one being for our former mayor, Brian Krajewski, who was early on as a big supporter of the underpass. He worked with George and many others. He brought in our state reps, and I'll explain that further when I present the new business. I know a lot of people, you know, when they hear this, they're going to think this is some type of a political thing, and no way is it. If you go back in time, when I sat on council with Mayor Krajewski, we quite clearly didn't get along in many items. As a matter of fact, it wasn't just bits in the newspaper, it was actually headlines. So, but I believe in justice.
Back when we had Newbauer.
Pardon?
Never mind. I got in trouble once for saying that before. I won't say it again.
So this isn't, you know, a political thing, but I think it's just justification. Brian, George, a number of others, they pushed those meetings to get the job done. As mayor, it was property acquisition. We looked at plans, and I think deservedly so. I think those 3 individuals deserve some recognition, maybe a name on a plaque. So I will be bringing that up in new business next time.
Thanks for the heads up. We'll look to see what information is forthcoming on that topic.
Thank you. And that's all I have.
Very good. Commissioner Jose.
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, well, I have nothing further to add. Just want to wish everybody a wonderful Fat Tuesday, and good luck with Lent.
Let me tell you what I'm giving up. Okay.
I know what I'm giving up.
I know.
May I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.